Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this session on reimagining the future of learning. Will the pandemic be a catalyst for evolution or revolution, which is a part of Beacon House's School of Tomorrow Global Conference. A little bit about the School of Tomorrow conferences before we start. These conferences trace their roots to 2000 and have been open to public since 2015. The School of Tomorrow conference is a gathering of the world's foremost thought leaders, and these conferences are intended to both educate the public as well as guide the general organizational direction and objectives of Beacon House. My name is Nassir Kasuri. I'm a director and board member at the Beacon House School System. Along with this, I'm on the board of Knowledge Platform, which is a company focused on leveraging AI and machine learning to maximize learning outcome. I also am the chairman of the board of Teach for Pakistan, which is an organization aiming to improve education in government schools by providing unique teaching internship opportunities to graduates from some of Pakistan's top universities. We have an esteemed group of experts with us today who will reflect on issues of critical importance in the field of education, particularly in light of current circumstances. Joining us are Dr. Roger Schank. Dr. Schank is the chairman and CEO of Socratic Arts, a company that delivers story-centered curricula to businesses and schools. He was chief education officer of Carnegie Mellon West and founded the renowned Institute for Learning Sciences at Northwestern University in 1989, where he is John P. Evans Professor Emeritus in Computer Science, Education, and Psychology. As a leading artificial intelligence researcher, he has written more than 20 books on the subject. We also have Miss Suzie Boss. Miss Boss is a writer and an educationist who works with schools interested in innovative approaches to teaching and learning. She is the author of 10 books, most recently Project-Based Teaching and Reinventing Project-Based Learning. She is a member of the PBL Works National Faculty and contributor to Edutopia, as well as a renowned journalist. We have Dr. Siva Kumari. After serving as Asia Pacific's Regional Director and Chief Operating Officer, Dr. Kumari was appointed as the first woman Director General of the International Baccalaureate in January 2014. Prior to joining the IB, Dr. Kumari served a 15-year tenure at Rice University, USA, leaving as the first Associate Provost for K-12 initiatives. Our final panelist is Dr. Graus. Dr. Graus has been associated with Kidzania since 2017. He was the founding chief executive of the Children's University and continues to work with organizations globally, including the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, the Council of Europe, the World Bank, as well as LEGO and Discovery Education. He is currently the Global Director of Education for Kidzania. I'd like to especially thank all of our panelists for joining us today. Some of them have had to wake up quite early. They're based in the US, so it is extremely early. We're extremely grateful to all of you for taking out the time. And it's a tremendous privilege to have you all with us here today. I just want to briefly contextualize, the discussion, and then we'll jump right into it. We're really going through unprecedented times right now. The world is facing a crisis unlike any, certainly, that we've seen in our lifetimes. The pandemic has had a profound impact on every function of society, including definitely education. The current education system, which had already come under a lot of scrutiny, with experts criticizing it as being an offshoot of the industrial era, unsuited for preparing students for the 21st century, is now being even more challenged. Education historically has been slow to adopt emerging technologies, and classrooms before this pandemic more or less were exactly the same as they were perhaps a century ago. In many ways, COVID has been a change accelerator, with practitioners, having to adopt modern technology, modern technologies and teaching methodologies in order to keep students engaged during these uncertain and difficult times. Um, at the same time, there are pressing questions about education equity as our reliance on technology increases. This session is intended to be an exploration of the changes caused by and accelerated by COVID and the implication of these changes on the future of education. I would like to remind our viewers that this is intended to be an interactive session. You can ask our panelists questions. They're going to be sent to us. And at the end of the session, we will try to direct as many questions to our panelists as possible. So without further ado, let's get into it, ladies and gentlemen. I would first like to start the session by asking our panelists to reflect on the state of education before the pandemic and how they feel the current crisis is going to have, whether or not they feel rather the current crisis is going to have a permanent impact on the way educators think about teaching and learning. So in no particular order, Ms. Suzie Boss, could you please provide us with your perspective on this?
Thank you, and thanks for the invitation to join you today as well. So my perspective is informed by working with schools around the world that are very interested in shifting to a more student-centered approach to teaching and learning. The goal here is to develop not only students who understand content deeply, but who are able to apply it in some way, to be able to use that information that they're learning, that deep academic rich content that they're learning to solve a problem or to respond to a challenge. And we've seen, I think, with COVID, this challenge writ large, around the world. Adults in the system, adults in the educational system have had to put to use those 21st century skills, if you will, that we want our students to be able to develop, to be problem solvers, to be able to be innovators and collaborators. I think as your question was to start with, where were we before COVID? I think we were on our way, part of a movement was underway to think about how do we develop 21st century skilled, competent individuals in education. And we're not there yet. So I'll stop there because I know we'll have a lot more to talk about.
Thank you for that. Dr. Graus, your perspective.
I think, again, hello to everybody and to my fellow panelists, and thanks again for the invitation, Nassir. I think we need to reflect on a couple of things where we were beforehand. And I think where we were beforehand, and I work pretty much all over the world, but know probably the English system best of all. We were in a place where we had constantly narrowed the provision into a national curriculum, which should clearly outline politically which subjects were more important than others. And this was, in a sense, then results in a testing regime and in a school inspection regime that declared you to be outstanding or less so. And increasingly, wherever I go in the world, when I ask children, why do you go to school? The answer is because I have to. And if you ask them how much they enjoy being at school, the answer too often is not very much. And I think there is an issue of purpose. And the purpose seems to have been lost, except that the purpose is to pass examinations and move on. I think that's one thing. I think the second thing is where we were, is that we've confused and starting to confuse schooling with education. So the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, 9 to 4 bit, where you are being taught, there's a disconnect with everything else that goes on in terms of learning outside the classroom and whatever. And it is becoming narrower. That thirdly brings us to a point whereby I genuinely think, and I think this is an outcome of what's gone on over the last couple of months, and certain lights have been shone in certain places and some of them not good. I think we generally started patting ourselves on the back that we were doing quite well. And that in terms of equality and social justice, that we were on the right way. And when you discover, even in a country like England and the United Kingdom, the enormous gap between have and have not, and therefore can and cannot, I think that presents us with a situation pre-COVID. I see COVID as a brilliant opportunity, one, not to throw the baby out with the bathwater, two, press the pause button and eventually come to some form of reset. But we need to really start to ask ourselves, why are we doing this? And answer that purpose question much better, or get the children to answer the purpose question much better than they currently are. So I'll stop there.
Thank you for that. Dr. Kumari, would you like to enlighten us with your views?
Let me try. I think I agree with both the panelists that have spoken so far. I think Dr. Boss's point about applying knowledge, I think that's the highest level of learning objective one can shoot for. And education is a profession. We know how to organize learning objectives, etc. So her point about that is quite important, I think. And again, I think it was really interesting to listen to Dr. Graus say, students are saying, because I have to go to school, and his call for rethinking the purpose of education. So what's the vision statement for each child in each municipality, etc., is quite important. I think we should be the IB strives to do exactly that. We try to bring the students' passion into it, and we try to go for treat the teacher as a professional and not like a craftsperson. So I think for us, what I would like to say is we should be designing learning for today. I know your conference says it's a school of tomorrow, but I don't think we should be thinking of tomorrow, because that just postpones the problem. We should really be evaluating today. And I think we should be thinking through, what does a focus on today mean? It's not just content. We're in the fourth industrial revolution already. Content is now available ubiquitously. You can get it anyway. You don't particularly need a teacher to tell you how to do a certain formula. You can go online and find 10 YouTube videos on that. So what we really need to be thinking through, what is the role of the teacher? Digital divide issues will be there. If it's not digital divide, it's some other social issue. Those will always exist. I think what we need to focus on is age-appropriate learning and designing learning environments and policies that really engage the student at all levels. And, we should not treat these, as Dr. Graus said, we should not be treating these children as guinea pigs for assessment data or schools as inspection sites. We need to really be moving to using both, understanding both the knowledge, skills, and attributes that are needed for a fourth industrial revolution, and understanding the repurposing the role of the teacher. I think in this epidemic, parents have seen good and bad teaching and have come to value teachers, I'm sure, as people who are caretakers of the future generation of, in this case, Pakistan. So I'll stop there and look forward to participating with the other questions that you have.
Well, thank you for that. I think all very, very valid points. So I'm wondering, can we maybe reflect on really what is important? We've spoken about, knowledge being easily available online, students not taking interest in school. How can we make education more interesting and relevant for students in the 21st century? And what indeed is it that we should be teaching them, for lack of a better word? Sorry, before I address this question to the panelists, I would just like to tell our viewers that one of our panelists is having, Dr. Schank is having a little bit of trouble with his technology. And I hope that he can join us as soon as that's sorted out. But in the meantime, we will continue the session. Please, Dr. Graus, how do we make education more interesting for children? Why are they so bored and what is it that we need to be teaching them right now, given that things are changing so rapidly that anything we teach them might be obsolete in the future. So what's relevant and how do we make it interesting?
I think the first and foremost, the children need to be genuine participants and stakeholders in the learning process, rather than be the sufferers of what they're being taught. But I think I'd like to take a step back really on this and ask the question, who is the child? And how well do we actually know our children? I ask this question a lot of principals and of teachers, and in my view, too often the answer I get is related to predicted grades and what the child can do and can't do, and how good the child is at acquiring knowledge, rather than actually knowing the child, knowing the aptitudes, and knowing where the child comes from. So at Kidzania globally, and as you know, we've done some research on children's attitudes to learning out of school, and in a sense, what connects to Spark. And what connects to Spark is purpose, aspiration, and independence. So actually, the children tell us very clearly that they learn best when adults are not in the immediate presence telling them exactly what to do. But I think the question, who are the children? If you think we put 20, 25, 30 children in a classroom, we have a preset curriculum that we take them through, we actually have no idea whether there are touch points in that curriculum that become personal for the child. A very esteemed friend and colleague of mine, Professor Tim Brighouse, often used to ask of head teachers and teachers, how well do you know your children? Do you know what flavor crisps they like? How close do you get to the child so that you can plan your learning to a personal level? The Industrial Revolution, schooling essentially was about mass production. If we are moving forward to have young people growing into adults who can make their own decisions, evidence-based, who are confident, not scared to fail, who look forward and are optimistic and are caring and kind, then we need to get to know the people we're interacting with in the first place. And then we need to recognize that some children come from socioeconomic, sociocultural backgrounds that require more of our input and more of a resource in order to create a level playing field in terms of opportunity. I think that's kind of where this needs to go.
Certainly. I mean, I think that there'll be very few people who would disagree with you in the current context. Ms. Boss, would you like to lend us your insights on this? What is really, how do we make education interesting for children, and what really do they need to know in the 21st century? What is education really?
But as Dr. Graus was saying, he was laying out some qualities of competent, educated young people, that they have confidence, that they have an ability to learn. He mentioned that they're caring and not afraid of failure. These are, if we think of backward design, what is the end in mind we're aiming for in education? These would be what I would consider very nice attributes to be aiming for. And then we back up from that and think, how do we get there? This is what teachers do in good curriculum design. They think about, where are we trying to get with our students and how do we get there? But educators across systems are doing much of the same thing by developing a portrait of a graduate, something that they share on their part of their vision and website. But these really need to become actualized and used in order to engage students in the whole process, so they don't feel like education is being done to them. He spoke about students needing a purpose. And I think that's our big missing piece when it comes to engagement. When I talk to students about when they are engaged, when you see that they are keen to be doing the work that they're doing, to be learning about what they're learning, it's because they feel like it's purposeful. They know why they're working hard to do excellent work or to create a solution to a problem that they really care about, and they need to learn deeply to get there. So I think if we can bring that purpose in, and my own approach has been to focus on project-based learning as a pedagogy, a strategy to get students on that path. But I think for a lot of our students, it's about making sure they don't lose track of some basic human qualities like curiosity, like being able to ask really rich questions that they care about. And I think if we can continue to redesign, rethink our educational systems so that those are the key attributes we want to encourage and cultivate and nurture in our students. And of course, that takes getting to know your students well. The relationship piece between teacher and student and among students, peer to peer. Education is a very social enterprise. And I think the more we can focus on those attributes, the better we will know our students and the more purposeful the whole learning enterprise becomes for them.
Okay. Thank you. Dr. Kumari, I'd like to ask you a question in the context of what some of the other speakers have been saying about education. And of course, you started out by speaking about how IB itself, believes and has a, educational paradigm where it encourages students to be creative and for education to be very individualized. I just want to ask you in that context, where at the primary years level, the PYP and the MYP, there's much less examination. It's much more formative. And as you start moving on towards the diploma program, there's in fact more examination than there is in the A levels in many ways, because you take 6 subjects as compared to 3, and you have to be examining in all of them. Why does that transition happen? And isn't that in many ways the antithesis of what you were saying that the IB believes in? It's a very rigorous, admittedly, there's much more going on in the DP than just exams, but there are a lot of exams going on. So why can't we get rid of them? And should we get rid of them? And if so, then why are they there?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there. I think first I just want to start off by talking about, what, Dr. Graus and Dr. Boss have said. I think for us, and I'll try to weave in your questions about the primary year program we have and the middle year program and then the diploma. I think we start off in the primary year program with the agency. Both Dr. Graus and Dr. Boss have talked about. It's giving the child that agency. I think children come into schooling, whatever background they're from, with a natural curiosity about the world. And I think what our job is as educators is to nurture that curiosity throughout the lifetime that the child is with. Unlike other educational systems like higher ed or etc., we in the K-12 space have that child for 12 years. So I think we really need to take into quite seriously our profession about what you're doing during those 12 years. And I really like Dr. Graus saying, you need to know the potato chips flavor. I think that's a very illustrative comment to say you really need to understand your children. And so we start from agency, and for those who don't know the IB very well, because I understand your audience is more than IB, we ask students to create passion projects at the end of it. So a primary year student has to, at the culmination of their program, create something called the exhibition, which requires them to research a topic and create change in the world. And so it is in the middle year program as well. We have something called the personal project in the middle year, where the child, where at that point, the student has to really understand a problem, do research, and actually physically create something. Because we know at that age, in the middle year age, that tactile and having something to do and having a purpose and planning, and throughout all of these, of course, we are asking students to learn skills that other panelists have talked about: research, owning the subject, owning change, ability to write, ability to define a problem, ability to ask the right question and the appropriate question, and challenging questions both for themselves and others. So I'll come to your point about the diploma program. Now, when you kind of migrate towards that end, I think the IB is quite concerned about the surrender value, right? We are giving this child a baccalaureate that has to be accepted the world around, accepted by universities, etc. And we are in the midst of actually reviewing that program to see what we can do given the current, it's actively going on right now with very, very deep conversations, including some of the questions that you're asking. We are trying to think through what is the end goal here in the current age. What is it that the student should be prepared with and how, because it's a 2-year program, so it's a culmination end. So we're trying to think of the whole thing as we should, that it is a continuum, and how do we bring the good that we have, this highly constructivist philosophy, as it were, child-centered philosophy, how do we bring it into the diploma? Now, the baccalaureate, by its definition itself, is a well-rounded liberal arts education pre-university. That's why we have the 6 subjects, because the idea being, one of the panelists talked about what is the purpose of education. The purpose of, we believe, is you created a well-rounded human being so that you're not super specializing at that age. You have all your life at the university and postdoctoral level to super specialize. So our point is you want to expose the child to all of these fields, humanities and the sciences and the maths and the language arts and the arts. And you also, as you well know, we have a course, so we have an epistemology course, a theory of knowledge course, in which we think about how do we learn. So our purpose is very much about developing a well-rounded child. And yes, does it take a lot more than other programs? It does. That's why it's known for what it is. And I think what we are trying to do now is, after lots of conversations with universities, which are saying pretty much the same thing you're saying, Nassir, is we are at a different place, is what the universities are saying. And we want to see more about the human, as Dr. Graus said. We want you, the IB, to think about how to give us more information about that child rather than the qualification we already give now, which is well understood, well accepted all around the world in some of the best universities and all other kinds of universities as well. So I think we are working on that to see what else can we do to give the universities a better sense of what this student is. And to do that, of course, then, as Dr. Boss said, we will need to backward plan or backward design, or use backward design to plan what will then the 2-year program look like. But we're in deep conversations about that as of now.
Well, it's very comforting to hear that. I mean, I'm glad that universities themselves are also thinking about how they should gauge students, because ultimately universities will have to change their admission criteria, because these things really go hand in hand. Dr. Schank, I'm glad that you've been able to join us. Can you now hear me properly?
I hear you.
Oh, perfect. Excellent. So Dr. Schank, we've just been, reflecting on, what education means in the modern context. We've been, of course, talking about the fact that it's an offshoot of the Industrial Revolution. A number of our panelists have said it's very important to understand the child closely, the child's learning needs, and really understand each and every child as an individual, and to make learning, I would say, perhaps more subjective to the child. I'm just wondering, you've always had some very profound and controversial views about education. So I would like you just to share with us, as you're joining slightly late, what you think is wrong with the current education system, how it needs to be changed and improved. And I'm going to ask you, an intentionally slightly, I would say, provocative question, which is that, is it a one-size-fits-all? So, different countries in the world are at different stages of economic development. The West, could definitely say, is now a knowledge economy, with very little work left in terms of labor, mundane tasks. Could one make a case that in economies and countries which are less developed, where there's still a considerable labor component to their economy, or perhaps it's a it's a more early 20th century, mid 20th century mode of production still in those countries, that perhaps the education system should more closely resemble what has existed for some time. And in more knowledge-based economies, it should, of course, be different. Or is it really a one-size-fits-all? So would love to get your perspective on that.
Well, you won't be shocked to know that I haven't agreed with a word I've heard so far since I've been sitting here. The liberal, are we going to still talk about liberal arts? Do you know who invented the liberal arts? The Romans. Do you want to know why? Because they wanted people to be good orators in the forum. Put it another way, rich kids had nothing to do but give speeches. And so for that reason, we had to teach the liberal arts and make well-rounded people. Yeah, baloney. Guess what? Donald Trump went to a liberal arts school. He doesn't strike me as a well-rounded person. And I think if you taught him philosophy, he wouldn't listen to you. And we're constantly just worrying about what the colleges want. In fact, when I was in Pakistan some time ago, you introduced me to a bunch of parents. And all they could think about was how are the kids going to get into Oxford, which is not an illegitimate concern when you're living in Pakistan. It would certainly help you to go to Oxford. But I'm not worried about that guy. That's a rich kid. I'm worried about your average kid. And your average kid has been totally mistreated, forced to learn things he doesn't want to learn, could care less about. Shall I name some? The quadratic formula, balancing chemical equations, what Descartes said. Who gives a damn? Why don't we let kids do what they want to do and get good at it? And I don't understand why we have to create curricula and subjects. The whole idea of a subject is outdated. Can we allow children to do what they want? The lady who was talking about the IB program had one piece of it that made sense. At some point, you let people do what they want. Good. Could that be the only thing you do? Could you just let kids do what they want? Is that a possibility? We're so busy selling nonsense that we don't have to see the forest for the trees. And my example is my son. And by the way, the answer is not to be a teacher, but to act and behave the way parents behave, which is when a kid says they're interested in something, you let them pursue it. And my son, he was interested in subways. All he wanted to do was ride the subway in New York. When he was 10 years old, I took him to Paris. And I said, okay, here, try another one. I pointed to the metro and I said, here's how you read the map. Here's how you buy a ticket. Buy. And he said to me, how have you been keeping this from me? I said, well, I'm not keeping it from you now. So he spent an entire year riding the subways, ignoring school. Well, that's just terrible, except he was having a good time and he was learning a lot about subways. And I used to take kids traveling with me. I went to Tokyo with him. He never got above ground. All he did was ride the subway the whole time. When he went to college, he went to Columbia University. Why? Because they have a subway in New York. And he called me the first week and he said, I've decided to be a history major. I said, then get on the next plane and come home. The fact that we have history majors is just appalling. Why? Is there tremendous demand for history professors? Does the world need more history? How about 10 people who study history and let's move on? I said, go home. He said, what should I major in? I said, subways. He said, how do you major in subways? I said, why don't you figure it out? To make a long story short, he's now the Chief Innovation Officer of the Los Angeles Metropolitan Transportation System. He's doing what he loves. I talked to him yesterday. All I can talk about is more transportation and more subway and more innovation and what he can do to make LA a reasonable place. That's what he cares about. It's all he's ever cared about. And he didn't major in history. All this nonsense of subjects and liberal arts and all this crap, which you do at Beacon House too. It's time to throw it out.
Oh, fair enough. Interesting. So just expectedly controversial, but sometimes I agree with you. I mean, kids should be allowed to explore their passions, and that's what they should make their lives work, and that's ultimately what will make their life meaningful. But don't you think that it's important to first expose children to different disciplines so they at least know they're out there? Like, for example, how will you know, for example, I took programming in school and I realized I was interested in computer programming. Before I took that class, I actually didn't know. So don't you think you're doing them a disservice by not at least exposing them to some basic things to begin with so they can really explore what they're passionate about? Because they may, unlike your son, they may not find it otherwise.
Everyone knows what they're passionate about. If you ask a kid, they'll tell you. The problem with expose is a flair word for me. Expose is a word that says, I'm going to make you sit and listen to this junk that you don't care about. And we're always exposing them to things. If you're interested in computers, you will be interested in computers, and you'll ask about them, and you'll try to figure them out, and you'll do what you can. You don't need to be exposed to a computer programming class, which is probably being taught by somebody who knows nothing about computers. Because on average, if he could be a good computer programmer, you wouldn't be a teacher. So what we're sitting here with is a whole range of things that we insist on exposing people to instead of letting them decide what they want to do. When you have a 5-year-old kid, you don't expose him to things. You see what he does. He wants to play with blocks. He wants to take a bicycle ride. He wants to play with his friends. Do it. My daughter never stopped writing. She was always writing. So she became a professional writer. What a surprise. But she wanted to be an English major, and I said, that's forbidden. Why? Because you want to learn how to write, not to be told how to write. And in fact, she has written quite a few books and is quite successful. The issue is not telling people what they need to know. This idea of we know what you need to know, we're going to tell you, is what's wrong with education.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I wonder if any of the panelists would want to reflect on, I don't know whether this question really is a great question, but it is something that I was reflecting on. Does anyone want to comment on just on the second half of my question, which is that, is it a one size fits all, or indeed, depending on the level of economic and social development in a country, should the education system differ in terms of how much flexibility and independence it gives to students? Would anyone like to reflect on that? Let me just pick someone. Dr. Graus.
I think one size fits all doesn't work, and certainly shouldn't work now. But I think one has to be very careful to stay realistic, not to go hype over substance. And I just wanted to highlight a kind of finding that comes from learning out of school. That is a Kidzania piece of research, Nassir, which you are familiar with. And essentially, we looked at children's aspirations and where they might come from. So we literally looked at hundreds of thousands of children all over the world, rich and poor, from the slums of Mumbai to the wealth of some other cities. And we literally looked at the choices children make, very young children, 4 or 5-year-old children. When they come to Kidzania, what is their first choice? Then we analyzed who the children are. And what is very clear, that even at a very young age, a number of things happen. One is all stereotypes are set at least from the age of 4, in their choices. Secondly, almost all girls choose activities below the age range, and almost all boys choose activities above the age range. And thirdly, children can only aspire to what they know exists, i.e., if children come from socioeconomically deprived backgrounds, they are already, if you wish, pre-programmed as to the choices of jobs they will try. They will lack the confidence and the experience field to choose wider, to widen their horizons. So therefore, our job becomes to create the opportunities for children to have those experiences and to have wider experiences. So the one-size-fits-all curriculum, which is, of course, top-down, already doesn't fit, because you need to begin to balance your educational provision around the child. And, of course, everybody will have a different opinion on that, but we're quite clearly based on research. And we find many, many teachers, specifically those from the more deprived areas, entirely agree what we do. We work very closely with Reggio Emilia on that. And I think we're getting places, but one has to be careful not to kind of just shout and tell people what to do, but actually work with people and with children to arrive at that point. I hope that kind of makes sense.
Absolutely, absolutely. I want to shift my my questioning now to the role of technology, which is now, of course, getting a lot of attention. We're using a technology platform, and for the most part, education right now is is taking place through online platforms. And there's increasing talk of hybrid models now becoming more prevalent, flipped classrooms, which again, technology tends to be an underlying factor behind these flipped classrooms. So my question is, how much of a role will technology play in the future of education? And if it's an integral, if it is an integral component in 21st century education, will it further exacerbate the effects of the digital apartheid that currently exists, and perhaps deprive less privileged children of the quality of education that they should really be getting. So I'm wondering, Dr. Kumari and then Ms. Boss, perhaps you could reflect on this.
Yeah, the questions of digital divide have been around for a very long time. And I think we all know that technology is getting better and cheaper all the time. So countries are essentially leapfrogging their governments and skipping the infrastructure to going and getting access to content and to devices that don't particularly depend on the government doing anything. So I mean, that's a whole other topic, which probably is not best gotten into too deeply here. But for me, I think one of the things is to actually ask the question: how can we use technology as a way to give children, the basic remediation that's needed? I've been looking at some countries like India and Pakistan, where the technology is actually going and remediating the concepts and the basic lack of teaching that's happening in government schools through algorithms that understand what's the basic concept and where did this child miss it. So, if they're starting at the, say, the national exam level and going backwards to see, oh, this child actually missed it way back when they were, 9 years old, they missed that concept or what, So I think that technologies can be used for a heck of a lot of things these days to enable learning. I think with the IB, we're trying to think through what is the way that we can deploy technology for two purposes. One, to help the student become a better learner according to the research-based evidence that we use in designing the knowledge, skills, and attributes that the child needs in today's world. And how can we enable the child to become a better learner using the tools that technology now provides, the diagnostic tools that we can use technology to enable learning? And then how can we provide the same tools to the teacher so that the content can be acquired, possibly from other sources or, flipped classrooms, etc., that we've discussed. And then the learning experience becomes a human experience with the child, so that the child's passions and interests are taken into account in projects, etc., that we are enabling them to do, and then kind of think of education that way rather than it just being it's all about content teaching and we'll check off the boxes and we'll assess so that we know that the student will perform well on a certain test at the end of the day. To shift that focus from we want the learning experience all along to be a really rich one.
Excellent, thank you. Ms. Boss, do you have what is your perspective on the really the technology divide in the world and how that's going to affect the future of education?
Well, I think the COVID crisis has certainly put a spotlight on the inequities that you're describing. And I think there are two inequities that are worth focusing on. One is just pure access. We've certainly seen the challenges of lack of access and, mapping to socioeconomic status. That's true around the world in the US as well as in Pakistan, I would say. But the second is understanding how to use technology well. Most schools had to close on very short notice or had to shift to remote learning on very short notice. Some teachers went right to very traditional teaching. It was worksheets online, basically. It was very rote sort of drill and kill sort of instruction. Student engagement was pretty low in those contexts. Screen time was high, engagement was low. Even parents were wondering, why are my kids having to do this? What's the point of this? That was in situations where the technology divide was teachers weren't aware yet, didn't know how to use technology for the rich sorts of learning that Dr. Kumari is describing. I think where it's worked well, we've seen situations where teachers were already familiar with technology tools and the purpose of different tools. It's not just one size fits all when it comes to technology. You need to think about what's the sort of learning experience my students are involved in. How can technology amplify that? Take that to a level that you couldn't accomplish with textbooks, perhaps, or without the connections that we can make across distances. So when teachers had a running start on using technology well and using it for more purposeful learning, again, I think we saw that mismatch, that there were those who were able to do that and able to transform to really rich learning experiences from home, and other situations where engagement dropped off, outcomes dropped off for students, and even parents were wondering, what's the point of this? So I think there are two ways to think about that divide.
Excellent. And Dr. Schank, I know that you had some views about the the technology divide. Essentially, would you like to share those with us?
Well, I think when you start talking about that, you're missing the point. I mean,
Okay.
There's always going to be a divide. That's how the world is. It's always been that way, with technology, without technology. With no technology, you still have bad schools and bad neighborhoods, and kids will get beating each other up, and a whole range of things that are terrible. The issue is to get somebody excited about something new that they didn't know was there, not by exposing them, but by talking about things. And it doesn't, I have a story about this where it's nothing new at all, but it makes the point, which is that people often bring me their children because they're unhappy in school, and what can I do? So I interviewed this kid with college-educated parents. What do you like to do? He said, I like to fix cars. I said, so go fix cars. No. My parents won't let me. I said, it's not hard. Go to a local garage and offer to do free labor and hell with school. He was very excited, and his parents then sent him to military school because he wasn't being disciplined well enough. And I had another cousin who came for advice what college you should go to. And I said, well, what are you looking for? He said, I'm looking for a lot of rah-rah. In other words, he wants to go watch football. We forget what these kids are about. They don't care about school. They endure school. And I've heard in the last 2 minutes the word tests. Tests are an abomination. I heard yesterday or the day before you had this Schleister guy from OECD who's ruining the entire world with his international tests. I was once called to Bogota, hurry up, we have an emergency. So I went down there, what's your emergency? We came in 65th in the PISA test. Who cares? It's not the World Cup. But we are all making kids hysterical about memorizing nonsense they'll never use in their whole lives. And I bring up the quadratic equation every time. Who knows it? Nobody knows it. Everyone had it beat into their head. They've never used it. There's no point in it, but we expose them to it. Can we just let kids have fun? When they have fun, they will find, and if you give them a big world to play in, they'll find things that they like. And you're right, if they come from a poor family, they're not going to find them as easily as they come from a rich family. But nevertheless, that's the job of education, to show the world to kids. Take them on a trip, go places, talk about what's exciting, what's fun. You don't have to expose them. You have all the kids talking about what they like to do and have other kids, well, gee, I'd like to do that with you. The issue of making school fun is the most important thing I can think of. Let it be fun. And why you have these kids right now complaining they like to go back to school is not because they like school. It's because they miss their friends and they're sick and tired of being home just like everybody else. And it should be, the social experience is important. The kids should be, take every school, rip out every classroom, and replace it by a whole lot of technology so there won't be a digital divide, and put stuff on there that's interesting. The problem you have is with that. I've been teaching 2 courses, one in Europe and one in the US, online for teachers who want to learn how to teach online in the last 2 months. Let me tell you, teachers don't even begin to understand how teaching works. They think if I talk at you, then that's teaching. It's not. So I try to ask them a simple question. They're having such trouble with it. Find something you'd like to teach kids to do that they would like to do. I had one guy say, well, I'd like to teach kids to do Morse code. Oh, that's important. Can we try thinking about something that kids really want to learn how to do and help them do it? And it is hard to even get them to answer that question. Teachers have never asked that question of themselves. They just want to tell you how to balance a chemical equation. They don't know why you'd ever need to do that, but everyone has to do it for no reason I can know. And what I want to see is that school offers 1,000 choices, 100,000 choices online that you get to do interesting things, and you pick one that interests you. You don't have to expose them to it. You just tell them about it. You interview kids, it turns out one of the number 1 occupations they're interested in is being a zookeeper. Why? Because they've been to the zoo. So take them to more zoos or zoo-like things. Let them enjoy life, and you can get interested. And this idea of teaching people to learn, everyone knows how to learn. Dogs know how to learn. They're very good at it. You move their food bowl, they'll figure out where it is. And they'll go and they'll learn the new location. We have no trouble learning. It's a very natural, innate thing to all animals. The problem we have is that the school insists on boring us to death to cause us not to look at what might be out there that's interesting. You were talking about computers earlier. I studied computers when I was a kid. Why? Because I knew there were computers. I didn't know anything about programming. I just knew there was something cool coming. I wanted to see what it was. I didn't have to learn how to program to do that. I eventually did and learned I didn't want to program, but I was still interested in computers, and I still am. I'm still not remotely interested in the bots or in programming. I'm interested in what can we do with them. One of the things we can do with them now is take the entire education system and kick it on its ass and let teachers stop being in charge of anything and schools stop being in charge of anything and let people who can afford it build all the cool stuff they can think of building that they would have loved as a kid, that they think some kids would love. Not all kids, maybe one kid in the whole place. I mean, I once had a meeting in my house maybe 15 years ago. Somebody from Pakistan was there, Zach, if you know him, was there. And I asked everybody what they thought the most important thing we could teach in their country was. Zach's answer was scientific reasoning. And I know why he said that, because he thought maybe Islamic reasoning was a good thing it could go, and we could replace it by being scientific. One of the most interesting answers was from a guy from Kansas who said, aerospace engineering. I said, what? Why do you need aerospace engineering? He said, do you know how many manufacturing plants we have in Kansas for airplanes? And there's not a single aerospace engineering course anywhere in the state. So I went to Boeing and I said, hey, give me a course in aerospace engineering I can build. And they said, what do you mean? I said, just tell me what would be fun to do. And if I had a kid all day in a classroom for a year, what could he do? And they said, well, he could design a 787. I said, okay, start designing a 787. What's the first step? I said, they know nothing. I said, design a table? I said, okay. So we went from designing a table to designing a sailboat, designing a biplane. And in the end, we had a really interesting and cool curriculum. The professor who was a part of that wanted to slam it down immediately. There's not enough math and science here. People show up at my university, they don't know math and science. Universities are a big part of the problem. They insist that you can't do anything in high school, which is a total prep period for college, which is ridiculous, that might be interesting to you because it has to prepare you for the exams for college. Colleges are one of the evil players in this game. As a college professor for 50 years, I can tell you that we are not interested in students. We've never been interested in students. We don't care about students. We care about research. As long as people understand that, you have a shot.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, Dr. Schank. Very interesting and provocative as always. Dr. Graus, I just, there's a question, as I said before, also, I want to speak about the Pakistani context a little bit. I think this is a question which is relevant to many, many countries, and it's particularly pertinent for Pakistan right now. Everything we've been talking about has been about creativity and giving the child the freedom to explore and think, really. We have a situation in Pakistan right now where the government is trying to develop a national curriculum with a large number of core subjects, with quite possibly a predefined book list. And of course, the reason for doing this is because they feel that it's essential for national integrity, for there to be a national narrative, and for everyone to be on the same page. So I'm just wondering, what is your view of that? And can a national narrative coexist with an education system that is essentially free and open and creative? So what's your view on that, Dr. Graus?
I think, thank you, Nassir. I think I possibly understand where that comes from. I have to say I disagree with it, and I'm disappointed that narrative still exists for a number of reasons. We would need to ask the politicians and those who devise policy what their reasoning behind this is, how that serves the children and communities and their families, and how that serves the future of the country. I'm very sad that we are still talking, and I applaud, incidentally, the International Baccalaureate around this, simply because it has the word international in it. So brilliant. It strikes me that we occupy. I have a 14-year-old daughter. She is probably now upstairs in her room talking to somebody somewhere in the world. It truly is. We have these devices which allow them access to other people, to knowledge, to fun, to whatever it is. And then we get back into the real world of politics and national curricula, whereby we have people building walls and we have people leaving clubs, be that Brexit or the wall in the States. And it seems to me that think how confused the children must become, because on the one hand you have this amazing access with in many ways endless possibilities for them to explore the likes and dislikes and the can and cannots. And then we have top down something that comes and says, I'm now going to put you in that jar because this is how I want you to behave. We need to create global citizens. So I think the debate needs to be had, what national curriculum serves, what it means, and who it's for. And I fear, and I only look at England, right? So please don't do what they're doing here, because it serves nothing. It serves nothing. We will educate a generation of youngsters who will be emotionally, socially left behind because others are still in a brilliant club. It saddens me, and I think we need to stand up against it. And I think Beacon House needs to stand up against it, and all other organisations need to simply say, not like that, because it's not in the interest of the young people.
Agreed. Dr. Kumari, I'm going to just now, we have very little time actually, but so perhaps just one question from our from our viewers, which I think is quite pertinent. We're talking about digitization and assessment. I mean, what is the role of digital assessment in the post-coronial future is specifically the question. And I would like to add to that, how can one ensure the efficacy of digital assessment and make sure that, for example, that there's no cheating and that it's being done honestly? And I know that IB does a lot of e-assessments. So how do you guys, what is your view of that going forward, and how do you ensure honesty and integrity in assessments?
I think if you approach it from honesty and integrity, well, integrity aside, if you approach it from honesty, you're going to design a system that's just going to be about how do I make sure this child is not cheating, which is, I think, the opposite end of the spectrum that we want to be in. I think it is the responsibility of educational systems to design assessment that really captures the individual student's ability, rather than figuring out how to design a system that doesn't allow them to cheat. I mean, these days, the children have access to so much information. So some of the questions we're asking ourselves is, how do you remove that need? How do you design evaluation? Because we have to do evaluations, so how do you design evaluations that really capture the high-end thinking of the student, and how do we kind of ensure that they have access to all the information in the world? So why would we not want them to access all that information of the world? Now, this is easier said than done. These high ambitions, when we are trying to create a system for the world, requires a lot of thoughtful approaches. We have done that in the for those viewers who are don't know as well, we've done that in the middle year program. So our assessments there are about giving the children, a lot of inputs and interactive inputs to then, try to ask at the concept level, what are you thinking about? So it's kind of like a question that is not particularly about a subject, but it is really about the student being able to pull the influence of different disciplines and design their own answer.
Thank you. I think that's very pertinent. I think, as we're saying that, accumulation of data is not really that important anymore. So in fact, if the students are relying on other sources, we may want to actually encourage that rather than discourage it. It's one of the skills we want them to know. Dr. Schank, I did see you waving your hand. We are very short on time. Can I request you to quickly, in 1 minute, give us your perspective on this?
Short question. Why do we have to do evaluations? We have to do evaluations. Why? If you stop that, if you get over that, we could change education. When you have a driver's license, it doesn't have an A or a B on it. There are two tests, a stupid one that gives multiple choice, and the second one, somebody looks to see if you can drive. Can we just see if you can do it and stop giving these idiotic tests?
That's a fair point. Actually, that is a fair point, and I think it's an entire it's an entire panel discussion in and of itself. But I'm cognizant of the fact that we have actually run out of time. So I would like to just thank all of our panelists for joining us. It's been a very interesting and stimulating conversation for me. And a learning experience, and I hope it has been for all of our viewers as well. Thank you again to our panelists for waking up so early in the morning in different parts of the world for making this session possible. I would also like to thank our corporate sponsors, UBL. Without their endorsement and support, this sort of event would not have been possible. And lastly, I'd like to thank all of our viewers for logging in and joining us for this session. We're nearing the end of the SOT conference now. I believe this is either the last or second last panel. It's been a pleasure for all of us at Beacon House to be part of this and bring all these amazing thinkers to our audience from around the world. And this is a yearly event, so we're going to continue doing this both virtually and physically. And we look forward to having our panelists and our viewers with us in the future. Until next time, everyone, it's been a pleasure to have you. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you, Nassir. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Thanks.